Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Well, not really. Today it's Middle East Talk. Talk about Trump, Syria, Iran. My guest and I plan in the next few weeks to continue our conversation about the Middle East, about ISIS, Iraq, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel-Palestine. To help clarify a Byzantine situation is a frequent guest here, Richard Murphy, former US Ambassador to Syria, Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, and the Philippines. He has served as US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern and Southern Asian Affairs. He has also been named Career Ambassador. He is also a Senior Fellow for the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Murphy is a frequent TV commentator and a widely consulted expert and a welcome guest here. Come back, come back.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Okay, we'll start with Trump. Does he have any clear direction to his foreign policy? Is there a incipient Trump doctrine?
It's just not clear yet. Look, the airwaves are full of intense discussions. He said this, he meant that, watch out here, look out for that. I think the fact is he does enjoy the reputation of being unpredictable. That's fine. And the catch is that unpredictability in a campaign is one thing, in a president-elect another. It's going to be a very different matter when you're playing a game as president at being unpredictable. That can get very, very tricky.
It's a complex three-level chess game, and he doesn't seem to know the rules or care to learn them. Well,
yeah, I think he's starting out, but it's not that unfamiliar, Doug, as a habit, a startup for presidents. They come to office, and you've watched many, I've watched quite a few myself starting out. Look, I was elected because my predecessors, many of them, if not all of them, were incompetent. And I am going to transform the situation. The catch is, at the end of the day, the world is waiting, curious, wondering where our president's going, but the world brings a load of problems and a load of its own solutions, and it's not amenable to being told, you will do it my way.
Okay, so, the Donald confronts reality. I mean, we're going to see that, but we don't know. But even in the transitional phase, he's caused a huge stir with China. I mean, he isn't even the president, and he's changed 40 years of U.S. policy.
Yeah, it's certainly been a break with the protocol at the presidential level. It's 1979 when we recognized and adopted the one China policy, and we're going to be dealing with Beijing as the leader of China.
Right.
Now, we've had a bilateral relationship, a very vital one, with Taiwan, but this gave a jolt to Beijing, and it was very good news to Taiwan that the two presidents had a substantive talk, apparently, about the issues of China in the world, the role of Taiwan, and U.S.-Taiwanese relations.
He's not even president.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mean, reading tea leaves, what did the selection of the National Security Advisor, the CIA Director, and the Secretary of Defense, any indications of policy, innovation, or policy, just what they're going to do?
Well, the one appointment that's gotten, I think, universal praise has been that of General Mattis, Secretary of Defense. a very thoughtful statesman, a man who had the name or nickname of Mad Dog because he's highly aggressive in battle on the battlefield, but not a mad dog on policy. And I think his appointment is particularly welcome. General Flynn had a fine reputation as an officer in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had difficulties running the bureaucracy that is the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he comes to the job with questions out there to be answered.
And a larger playing field, because then you have the whole Defense Department.
He is the one key figure in the administration who is supposed to lay out for the president all of the different recommendations coming at the presidents from the cabinet. And not to be taking sides, but here is what defense, here is what state, CIA, et cetera, commerce, whatever issue is there. They hear the arguments, but to refrain from saying, take this one.
Right. Now, he has shown an incapacity to do such?
Well, he's never had this type of role before.
Okay.
We'll see.
During the campaign, the theme of the U.S. should not act as the world's policeman seemed to have resonated among some segment of the American people. What does that mean in terms of policy? Or does it mean anything?
No, not much. It's a good catchphrase. And as the American people, as the public was treated to a review of the triumphs and failures of the Obama administration as the campaign went on, you'd think that it had been an absolute disaster if you were listening as a, say, conservative Republican. Now the world needs straightening out, and our man is going to pull that off. Well, as I say, the world just doesn't change that easily or that quickly.
Okay. Let's move from Trump to the Middle East, and particularly in Syria. What has he said about Syria, and why exactly is Syria as important strategically as it is, or was said to be?
Well, what he has said about Syria, as I recall, was simply, it's a mess that should be avoided. Now,
doesn't take you very far, but
it doesn't take you far. He has said we should be finding a way to cooperate with the Russians, and that's led some of his critics to say, oh, he's fallen in love with Putin, and he thinks Putin respects him so much that they'll have a wonderful relationship. Well, Putin's got his own ways and his own policy. He's proven to be very shrewd on Syria. The Obama administration was commenting when Putin entered the field militarily over a year ago, Russia was going to find itself in a quagmire, and it's a total mess. We shouldn't be concerned. Well, it hasn't proved to be the case. They have taken a stand to support the regime in Damascus, which has been an extraordinarily brutal regime. They have not seen an alternative to that. So they say we're going to support it in order to put down the terrorists of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic radicals. Now, they've got a real need to pursue that campaign because of their concerns that this is has proven in the past contagious within Russia, in Chechnya, and some of the other republics. So they've got grounds to be worried. They have bombed. They have targeted, assuming they're able to pick the targets. There's been the accusation that they've targeted hospitals, they've targeted facilities which have only been of benefit to a struggling Syrian population. And they've added to the pressure, where as we speak right now, it looks like the tide has turned, that Aleppo,
Yep.
the major holdout of the opposition, is about to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And they will say that had to be, because the terrorists were in control. Now, we have argued from the beginning, look, there are a lot of moderate Syrian oppositionists out there, and they should be supported. They're not terrorists. They are fighting the regime and its brutality, its cruelty to its own people. But at the end of the day, the opposition hasn't been able to come together to unite into an effective fighting force.
And anyway, they're disengaged in so many different ways.
You know, they accuse us in turn of not giving them enough support to be an effective fighting force. There's some truth in that. But the history of political opposition in Syria is not a pretty one. They have tended to play the game, I know best, I am the logical successor to the leader, choose me. And then the arguments start all over the circle, no, not him, me. I'm the real leader. You know, I think the Russians, they've had a long experience with Syria. And I can remember when I first arrived in Damascus in 1974, it's a long time ago, as ambassador, we were reopening relations with Syria that had been cut after the Six-Day War, 7 years earlier. And the Russian was the dean of the Corps. He was a somewhat elderly gentleman and very polite. He was the first one I called on as the dean. And he said to me, I know you're coming from a country in the United States sees Syria as a Russian puppet, just a plaything. We can do what we want. Well, let me try to explain. It's true. And he paused. It's true that they accept from Russia arms, loans, grants. We got a major student exchange program. The Syrians accept everything from Russia. Pause. Accept advice. And I've never forgotten that, and I'm wondering if that isn't still much on the minds of the Russian leaders in Moscow today. It's a regime in Syria which has been extraordinarily, in our opinion, unnecessarily far too brutal. It could have managed the dealings with the Arab Spring, as it was called 5.5 years ago, without the brutality, and could have co-opted elements within Syria to its advantage. It didn't do that. It tried to smash them, liquidate them. And it's turned into a massacre. The news of this past week had an interview with the head of the cemetery in Aleppo. And he said very simply, look, we filled up the old cemetery. A year ago, we closed it. We opened a new one. We filled that last week. I haven't got a machine to dig a grave. There's nothing to work with, and the dead keep coming in. It's a terrible picture.
Okay, so can Humpty Dumpty be put together again? I mean, Syria is you've described it as an improbable construction, a grab bag of ethnicities and religion. Can it be put together again? And then the second question, which really is distinct, is are we better off with Assad than without Assad? So, I mean, do the first one.
Can it be put back together? Is there enough pride among the people, enough sense of distinctiveness? We are Syrian and we're proud. We have a history, we have a culture. In the 60s, they looked across their border at the Iraqi revolution and they said, you know, they're beasts there in Iraq. They're barbaric. We're not like that. we were able to find ways to tolerate each other in religious differences and political differences. And then in 1970 and 70, when the Ba'ath Party had its success, on the dates, it took over in 63, and then by 70, Assad, the father of the present leader of Syria, became president. He stayed in power for 30 years till he died. It's tempting to say Syrians can only be controlled and led by a strong man. And the father was a strong man. He was also a brutal man. And people disappeared, enemies, critics were squashed. And the city of Hama was targeted with field artillery in order to put down the Muslim Brotherhood in 82. And it's his example which the son's regime has been following ever in the last 5 years. Hit the opponents hard so they can't get a second breath and then prevail.
Yep.
Is that the way it's going to go? In the short term, yes. It looks like Assad has the determination. His circle is bound to prevail, sees itself committed to prevail because they love power and they feel they have the capability to maintain that power. And we haven't shown an ability to generate enough energy in the opposition to challenge it. Now, let's see if we can work out something with the Russians.
And is that possible?
It is possible. It appears.
What do the Russians want?
Well, they want one thing which we very much want, which is to eliminate the extremists and cut the ground out from the Islamic State and Qaeda. That should be a substantial area of agreement for us to work together. It hasn't worked yet. We have yet another series of talks between Secretary Kerry and their foreign minister, Lavrov. And it may be that a deal is about to emerge where Aleppo will fall out of control of the rebels, will be pulled back into the orbit of the regime. But then, can the Russians work with the regime? Can we work with the Russians and through the Russians with the regime on working out a deal to reunite the country?
Okay, now let's bring in the third player, Iran, and then you have the triumvirate of the Russians, the United States, and Iran. Talk about Iran-U.S. relations and prospective relations under a Trump regime, even though it's foggy.
Yeah.
And secondarily, I mean, to add substance, will Trump tear up the nuclear agreement or attempt to renegotiate? Yeah. So there you go.
Well, take the last one first. The nuclear agreement isn't a bilateral agreement between Washington and Tehran. It involved the British, the French, the Russians, the Chinese, the Germans, and the European Union. I think the Obama administration has made clear their determination has been to make sure that what was agreed is carried out. And sure, there's been some minor slippage, but by and large, as I understand it, the Iranians have acted as they said they would act.
Right.
And the threat that was imminent of a very short-term run to acquiring nuclear weapons has been forestalled.
Right.
I can see the Trump administration bearing down hard in rhetoric about we're going to watch those people like hawks and we're going to jump on them with the slightest variance in performance below the level that they've agreed to. And that will be essential. There's
But
no
that's a
need to
continuation of the Obama policy.
well, it's not going to be called that. It's,
no, okay, but substantive.
it's
okay.
going to be tougher, more realistic
Okay.
and effective,
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough. you're dealing with two Irans at least. There is the Iran whose leader, Khamenei, authorized negotiations for a deal to block the acquisition of nuclear weapons. There's an Iran that, represented by the Revolutionary Guard,
Right.
by some of the highly conservative mullahs, who feel that they gave away too much and that they're not saying they want nuclear weapons, but they're cautioning, watch out for those Americans. They're going to try to blow us up and eliminate our regime and our way, which has been proven to be the only way to rule and effectively lead the Islamic world. That element is in no mood, has never been in a mood to compromise. They are also under the eminent leader, Khamenei. So he has managed to, find it possible to work out a deal while not sacrificing Iranian sovereignty. Can we continue to work with that divided authority under the unity of the one sole leader? It's not going to be easy. And
It requires really complex, subtle skills on the part of outside actors.
yeah. Well, there have been some very fine minds, not just in Washington, but in this group that carried out the negotiations. They're aware of the intricacy and the complexity of the problems, and I'm sure they're going to be finding ways to express their views to the president, the new president in the United States. And I'm hoping he will be listening to them, because something very unusual was achieved in that agreement. And it wasn't the destruction of peace in the Middle East and the enormous threat, et cetera, to Israel that the Israeli leadership was saying until the deal was reached.
So you're saying to me that it's basically a continuation of the Obama strategy: accept the agreement and curb the aggressive behavior elsewhere, speak loudly and carry some kind of a stick. Move beyond that. What could be the relationship in a year or two?
With Iran?
Yes.
Well, it still takes two to tango, and we've got two different tangoists in Tehran and an opinion in the States which is divided. There are still some that feel it was a tragedy to have reached that agreement.
Yeah.
We should have hit them.
Yeah.
But even the hardest noses on our side have said, it's true that if we had struck them militarily, we could have wiped out their nuclear infrastructure, and it would have set the program back 3 or 4 years. They don't claim that would have been the solution forever. So we just have to keep working day and night to maintain the surveillance and the compliance with that agreement.
Okay, let's get back to Syria with the Russian the triangle. Well, it's a quadrilateral. The Russians, the United States, the Syrians, and the Iranians. The Iranians have to be brought into this agreement as well, and that could be a stabilizing force. In other words, it could be an entree to the Iranians by the United States, should we choose to accept it.
Okay, it could be, you're right. At the same time, Iran has seen itself as relaunched towards its target of being a major power. It is a major power in the region.
Yes.
Always has been.
Yes.
We sanctioned it, we confined it, we limited what it could do. Then critics of the nuclear agreement say, we gave it all up. We gave them hundreds of billions of dollars, which they're now using to reinforce their maneuvers throughout the Arab world. And you will maybe talk about it another occasion, but don't forget, we've got allies in the Arabian Peninsula that are worried sick about the Iranian intrusions in the Arab world. And they see Iran in Syria. And that's what has presented a very confusing picture of how to manage the Syrian situation, as using Syria as one more stepping stone to encircle and cause them serious harm.
Well, the United Arab Emirates, the Saudis. I mean, this is a regional power struggle,
right.
And apparently Iran is on the offensive, and they are worried.
That's right, and they've got a claim on for our attention. They currently have come to believe that the Obama administration had lost interest in their welfare, had talking of the pivot to Asia, it was going to abandon the Middle East. Well, I don't think that ever was the intention of the Obama administration, but the affairs are so sensitive that Obama had only to say Iran and Saudi Arabia should find a way to share authority in the region. That was a total insult, and just seen as a very destructive attitude towards Saudi and Arab world interests.
Yes,
it makes you wonder: can we ever have an effective Middle East policy?
Well, with that thought, we're going to end our discussion now, and then come back in a couple of weeks and talk about Iraq, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, ISIS, and everything else. But the discussion is wide open. It is an open book, and that's what we can look forward to in the next year.
Well, do you expect in the next 2 or 3 weeks it'll all become totally clear?
No, I don't. I just hope it doesn't become more muddy and dangerous. Stop. My special thanks to Ambassador Richard Murphy for helping us understand the convolutions of Middle East entanglements. Watch for us as Ambassador Murphy and I continue to work to loosen the Middle East's Gordian knot here on CUNY TV. Good.
Look forward.
Good. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.